Welcome to the 10th episode of Scripture in a Year, hosted by Saints Peter and Paul Orthodox Church in the Albanian Archdiocese of the OCA. Today's readings are Genesis chapter 37 to 40. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. This is the genealogy of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the sheep with his brothers. Now the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age. He also made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak civilly to him. Then Joseph had a dream and reported it to his brothers. Thus he said to them, "Hear this dream I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then, behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." So his brothers said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream, and told it to his brothers, and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me." So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come and bow down on the ground before you?" And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in his mind. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers shepherding the sheep in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." So he said to him, "Here I am." Then Israel said to him, "Go and see if it is well with your brothers, and well with the sheep, and bring back word to me." So he sent him out to the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was, wandering in the field. So the man asked him, saying, "What are you seeking?" He replied, "I am looking for my brothers. Tell me where they are feeding their sheep." The man said to him, "They have departed from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now, when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, 'Some wild beast has devoured him.' We shall see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." Again Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit in the desert, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands, and bring him back to his father." So it came to pass, when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped the tunic of many colors off of him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, which was empty, for there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat a meal, and lifted their eyes and looked. And there was a company of Ishmaelite wayfarers coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, but let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. Thus the Midianite traders passed by, and the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of gold. So they took Joseph to Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and when he saw Joseph was not in there, he tore his clothes. So he returned to his brothers and said, "The lad is not there, and I, where shall I go?" Thus they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and had it brought to their father, and said, "We found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" So he recognized it and said, "This is my son's tunic. A wild animal has devoured Joseph and carried him off." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. Thus all his sons and daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, and he said, I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." So his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and a captain of the guard. It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. Then Judah saw there was a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he married her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and called his name Onan. She conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah. She was at Chezib when she bore them. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, and God killed him. So Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and marry her, and as her brother-in-law, raise up seed to your brother." But Onan knew the seed would not be his, and it came to pass that whenever he went in to his brother's wife, he emitted his semen on the ground, lest he should give seed to his brother. But the thing he did appeared evil in the sight of the Lord. Therefore he also put him to death. Then Judah said to Tamar his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till my son Selah is grown." For he said, lest he also die like his brothers. So Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers in Timnah, he and his shepherd Hira and Adullamite. So it was told Tamar, saying, "Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." Thus she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, made herself beautiful, and sat down near the gates of Anan, on the way past Timnah. For she saw Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute because she had covered her face, and he did not recognize her. Then he turned to her by the way and said, "Let me come in to you," for he did not know she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, "What will you give me that you may come in to me?" He replied, "I will send a young goat from the flocks." So she said, "Will you give me a pledge till you send it?" Then he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" So she said, "Your ring and cord and the staff in your hand." Then he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. Thus Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his shepherd to the Adullamite to receive his pledge from the woman, but he did not find her. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, "Where is the prostitute who was in Anan by the roadside?" They replied, "There was no prostitute here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I cannot find her." Also the men of the place said no prostitute had been there. Then Judah said, "Let her have them, lest we should become a laughingstock. For I sent this young goat, but you did not find her." Thus it came to pass, about 3 months later, that Judah was told, saying, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has committed fornication and is pregnant because of her adultery." So Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, "By the man to whom these belong, I am with child." So she said, "Determine whose these are, the ring, the cord, and the staff." So Judah acknowledged them and said, "She has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah, my son." But he never knew her again. Then it came to pass, at the time for giving birth, that behold, twins were in her womb. So it was, when she was giving birth, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." Then it happened, as he drew back his hand, that his brother came out unexpectedly. And she said, "How did you break through? This breach be upon you." Therefore she called his name Perez. Afterward his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and she called his name Zerah. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, Pharaoh's eunuch and captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was living in the house of his lord, the Egyptian. So his lord saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper at his hand. Thus Joseph found grace in his sight, and was pleasing to him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and put everything he had under Joseph's authority. So it was, from the time he made him overseer of his house, and of all he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all he had in Joseph's hand, and did not know what he had except for the bread that he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Then it came to pass after these things that his lord's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his lord's wife, "Look, my lord does not know what is with me in the house, and has committed all he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" So it was, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her, to lie with her, or to have relations with her. But it happened about this time, when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. So it was, when she saw he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, "See, he brought in to us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. Thus it happened, when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, he left his garment with me and fled and went outside." So she kept his garment with her until his lord came home. Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, "The Hebrew servant you brought to us came in to mock me. So it happened, as I lifted my voice and cried out, he left his garment with me and fled outside." So it was, when his lord heard the words his wife spoke to him, saying, "Your servant did to me after this manner," his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's lord took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and he gave him grace in the sight of the chief prison keeper. So the chief keeper of the prison put under Joseph's authority both the prison and all the prisoners, and whatever they did there. The chief keeper of the prison did not look into anything under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Now it came to pass after these things that the king of Egypt's chief cupbearer and the chief baker offended their lord the king of Egypt. So Pharaoh was angry with his two eunuchs, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Thus he put them in custody with the chief bodyguard in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. Then the chief jailer committed them to Joseph, and he attended them, so they were in custody for a while. Then the king of Egypt's chief cupbearer and the chief baker, who were confined in the prison, had a dream, both of them, each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with its own interpretation. So Joseph came in to them in the morning, and looked at them, and saw they were troubled. Thus he asked Pharaoh's eunuchs, who were with him in the custody of his lord, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" So they said to him, "We each had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Therefore relate them to me." Then the chief cupbearer related his dream to Joseph, and said to him, "Behold, in my dream a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches. It was as though it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and its clusters brought forth ripe grapes. Then Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." And Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Now within 3 days Pharaoh will remember your position and restore your office of chief cupbearer, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to the former manner, when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when it is well with you, and have mercy on me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this prison. For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and I also have done nothing for them to put me into this dungeon." When the chief baker saw the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream, and there were 3 white baskets on my head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of baked goods for the Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket on my head. So Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift off your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh from you. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he remembered the positions of his chief cupbearer and chief baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Here ends the reading for today.